Good morning. If you were here before for the two sermons that were just referenced, I hope you'll find that there's... I really have a gift for that. I speak Italian. I hope you'll find that there's more there in the little serenity prayer version that I'm referring to. For those of you who weren't here before, no fear, I'll give you everything you need to follow along with where I'm going. And was indicated earlier, part of what I want to do today is an audience involvement part. And so I've got a little exercise where we can get personal without you sharing any personal information, I think. And so we'll see if that works. The serenity prayer in its simplest form: give me the courage to change what I can, the serenity to accept what I cannot change, and the wisdom to know the difference. So I started in the middle of that with the acceptance that's so hard for me personally. And then in my last sermon, I examined what's involved in changing what I can. So now I get to culminate this morning in this philosopher's delight, wisdom. The way that the prayer is written, wisdom is knowing the difference between what I can change and what I can't change. And there are all kinds of ways that we can get that wrong. It's a very important discernment to make. So one of the ways to get at the importance of that real world wisdom, not theory wisdom, but down-to-earth wisdom, is to look at just briefly some of the ways we can get it wrong. So I might assume that there's only one way that a change can be made, and I can't do that one thing, and therefore I can't make the change. That would be unwise because there may be other ways of going about getting to whatever ultimate change I might wish. Some of you who are here might remember the example I gave of a door that won't open. But it's always opened before. And if I think this is the door and it won't open, then I might prematurely think that there's no other way in, when all I really might need to do is look around for the other door, or for what it is now, right? Also, it might seem too big a thing to change. Society's been this way so long, I might just feel like that's just the way it is. And so I could rationalize things that really might be susceptible to change if we only believed we could do it. Worse yet, I might say that about myself. This is just the way I am. My father was that way. My grandfather was that way. It's a family tradition. It's part of my character. It is not going to change. It is fixed in my genetic code. Well, maybe. Maybe not. Or I might think, well, everyone knows such, and so it must apply to me. And I may think that, well, if anybody can make this change, and everybody should make this change, then I too should be on Twitter all the time, or whatever the popular wisdom happens to be. So one of the things that existential thinkers and authors of different kinds have reminded us over the last century or so is that each of us is unique, and no one else's formula is going to be able to dictate our life. No one else is going to be able to tell me what I'm incapable of. No one else is going to tell me what is going to bring ultimate meaning or satisfaction in my life. Those are discoveries and accomplishments of me in my life. I might have faith in the good sense that if I just keep pushing, if I try hard enough, if I push hard enough, this door will open. And so, by God, I've gotten through a lot of hard things. I've gotten through trauma. I've survived. And the way I've done it is I have pushed, and I have pushed, and I have pushed, and I have done whatever I have to do. And if this door is the key to where I need to get, I will push until this door opens. That is admirable. It is brave. And it has been a strategy that has helped people survive situations that I might not have survived in any mentally healthy sense of the word. Is there ever a time where that doesn't work? Push on the door until it opens. What if the door opens inward? What if what you need to do is yin instead of yang? What if it's not a matter of willing your way through, but of stepping back and releasing and letting go? That difference between the courage to change and the acceptance of what you can't, that balance of the two that we find reflected in Chinese philosophy particularly, but in other places as well, I think is an essential part of what has to count as the real world wisdom that the Serenity Prayer is pointing to. And I think it's not just a matter of, can I change this? It's not just a matter of, does the door push open that way or pull open, or is it locked? I think that along with those ways we can misjudge something, that we have to look at what it means to know change. So what I want to do this morning, to know the difference, is to know in ourselves what the difference of change means, and to know in ourselves the difference that real acceptance would make also in those cases. So to me, all of that is wrapped up in what I would consider, excuse me, the wisdom of living the good life. Not just the yes or no, the whether of change, but I want to ask what it means to know the difference. Because going back to Socrates and Plato, we only approach wisdom by striving to know. Plato drew a distinction between knowledge and opinion. I may have beliefs, and they may be correct. Another thing along with that is the difference. Knowledge attains to reality. Opinions only deal with appearances. Opinions and beliefs are about what seems to be the case. But when we're talking about what's important in our lives, we don't just want the appearance of it, we want the real thing, don't we? So the real thing, whether that's happiness, goodness, wisdom, success, love, we don't want a semblance of it. We don't want a Sears poncho, to invoke Frank Zappa's famous distinction. We want a real Mexican poncho. We want the real thing. And wisdom involves knowledge. And in that sense, knowing, not just believing, knowing, not just the appearance or the seeming of. So, wisdom in the sense as it's addressed by Plato, I think is well reflected in what was inscribed over the Oracle of Delphi, know thyself. I gave a joking definition of change last time that's worth repeating, I think. Change is what other people should do. But really, the change that we're interested in, the field for the productive changes, the field for the necessary changes, the close-to-home change that I need to consider, can consider, might consider, and will be glad I did or didn't do, is the change in me, not in someone else. You know, I just have not been able to find any way to get Donald Trump to do things differently. I don't know why that is. He seems not to be telepathically tuned in to all my gentle suggestions about behavioral modification. But for my life, I'm right in the middle of it. In theory, I'm even the person in charge. I say in theory because it's a more complicated process than that. So I said last time that if we really understand the psychology of change, we can lay out a natural path to follow on the course of the change that we desire when that's clear to us. It really makes sense. Something in my life now is not how I'd like it to be. It could be better. And so you can start thinking, the exercise I'm going to involve you in today, I'm going to ask you to think of something in your life that's like that. Something that isn't how you'd like it to be, at least not quite, that it could be better. Well, if it could be better, surely I would like it to be better. How hard a jump in logic is that, right? It could be better. I want it to be better, okay? Or this one. And if I want it, then it sure makes sense to choose that, doesn't it? Well, I want it, but I'm not going to choose that. I'm going to choose what I don't want. Don't ask me why. I don't have to give you a reason. I only answer to myself. I'm going to choose what I don't want. That's how I've always done it. So if I want it, it makes sense to choose it, right? Once I choose it, I'm on that path. I've aligned myself with that change. I'm underway. They say the journey of however many thousand miles begins with a single step. That's the step that matters. I've chosen it. But there can be a lot of twists in that path, like the plot of a novel that you can't put down. So I thought what I'd do to introduce the exercise for you all is to share a précis of my own life change plot. My change project is based partly on the fact that when, at least the self-perception, that when I was a child and a youth, I saw myself as different from most other people socially and in some of the characteristics of myself. I was socially awkward, I was immature, and so I evolved a hyperactive, quirky, zigzag style of being in the world. This was partly protective. It allowed for certain evasions and dodges and clevernesses, improvisations and that sort of thing in a way that I could hope to pull off. It was partly indulgent because I didn't want to buckle down and be disciplined and do the stuff that people are supposed to do in quite a few cases. It was partly truth in advertising. Because if you met me and talked to me at all, you would understand from my way of being that you should not expect me to be someone who's going to be a conformist in the real true sense of the word. So given all of that, I thought, well, my fit, you know where I would really fit in well? As an outside-the-box visionary change agent within a community, serving a community that valued my gifts. How cool would that be? Whoa! Imagine, he's a philosophy professor. So people, well, philosophy, that's kind of weird stuff anyway, and you look at him, you know, he's not just a philosophy professor, he's kind of a weird philosophy professor, but he's a professor, you know, and so he's able to attain this petite bourgeois stuff, he's able to do, anyway. It just so happened, whether we're talking about philosophy professor, behavioral health quality improvement, advocate for at-risk homeless people, navigating Social Security's legalisms, it just so happened that I have a combination of attributes that makes me a really attractive candidate, and once you've hired me, really uncomfortable for certain people who are used to doing things in accustomed ways. Can you believe that? So believe it or not, I experienced setbacks, rejections, dismissals, and what has proven later in life to look like trauma. So I felt like I'm a car driving in the wrong gear. Given all that stuff and the way I tried to accommodate, and this didn't work and that didn't work, it's like, you know, the transmission's all kind of muddled up now. And I just decided several years ago, I want to do it right. I want to fix that. Whatever's mucked up in the transmission that I've got, I want to fix that stuff up. To mix the metaphor, I think this is a better way to think of it. Imagine software. Imagine a software program that has evolved over decades, that still has all the workaround coding for generations of bugs. Have any of you ever seen Rube Goldberg drawings? Ingenious at the way that he would make, the game Mousetrap was based on this, just all these crazy ways that you could make something happen. And I sometimes feel like my inner lifelong programming is like a Rube Goldberg drawing, and that if we could just straighten some of this stuff out, we wouldn't have to drop that into the hand to make the marble roll around, you know, that kind of thing. So I felt like I was ready to fix that my programming had been like that, and for me, commands, remember I used the coding analogy, and the programming commands like, just do it, would get hung up in these glitches, And I couldn't even see at the user level what that stuff was. Well, why can't you just get on with that? Why don't you just, I don't know. But at the user level, I don't have access to that programming. So what I decided to do, since I felt that I was unable to make the desired change, I did not assume that it can't be changed. Only that the way I was trying to do it wasn't working. So instead of falling back on the bromide, that's just the way I am, I looked for help from someone who could reach into that unconscious coding and help me reprogram. In other words, my choice for change has been an ongoing course of therapy. When I wrote the overall description for this sermon, I thought I might go a little bit into some of what I'd learned in this process, not about me, but about trauma and resiliency and the ways we can unblock ourselves. But there's some other things that I want to do that I think are more important. So let's begin by looking at you. I want to get personal, but as I said, without sharing personal information, I have been an advisor for the teen group at my church for about 20 years. And one of the games that we play is called teapotting. If we were doing this today, one or two of you would leave the room and the rest of us would say, okay, what is teapotting going to be? And we'd pick an activity. And then you'd come back and you'd ask questions like, is teapotting something you can do alone? Did people teapot 500 years ago? Are there any animals that can teapot? Do you need special equipment for teapotting? And so what we did is it becomes like this guessing game, a little like 20 questions about an activity. We're going to use the word teapotting for a change you would like to make or are thinking about making in your life if that change is something you feel could be an improvement. But in order to avoid confusion as you're sharing about teapotting in your life and your contemplation of change, I'm going to pick a different word for something that you want to give up. Like, let's say I'm a smoker and I'm really, really wanting to quit smoking. Then the thing that you'll talk about, instead of teapotting, the thing you want to do, you're going to talk about coffee earning. So if it's something you don't want, I don't want to be a coffee earner anymore. I want to give up coffee earning, or at least I want to cut way down on coffee earning. Or if your focus is on something you want to do, I really need to do a better job of teapotting. I want to really be a teapotter. I'm at a point in my life now where I'm ready to teapot. Okay? This is how we're going to talk. Okay? So I don't want to hear about your relationships. I don't want to hear about your parents and your kids and all that other stuff. I don't want to hear about your deep, dark secrets. But I am interested in how you're thinking about teapotting, how you're thinking about coffee earning, one or the other. So two main strategies you can take to approach this exercise that will help it benefit you. One is to focus on something that if you could change one thing in your life, what would it be? If you could give up one coffee earn, if you could take on one teapot, what would it be? Alternatively, if there's a change that you've been wrestling with making, and you're kind of on the verge and you're just not sure, then that would be a really good choice. You haven't really chosen it, but you don't know what. It might be a change in behavior, like smoking, but we don't just do behaviors, we do attitudes. Believe it or not, I have certain attitudes toward Republican leadership which have gotten fairly well fixed at this point in my civic life. And so if I wished to be a completely kind and charitable person who held no rancor for anyone, I might wish to change an attitude that I had about someone. Another example would be beliefs. We do our beliefs, especially our deeply held beliefs about ourselves. There are ways I do my belief that I'm worthy. And there are ways that people do their belief that they're not worthy, for instance. So perhaps something you'd want to change is more at a level of belief than of behavior. There are many different registers to each of us. Let me start by asking you, how long have you been contemplating teapotting or giving up coffee earning? The experts of change in behavioral health anyway tell us that there's a stage of pre-contemplation where we're not really ready to even think about it. Then there's the contemplation stage where we're, God, can I do this or not? Do I want to do this or not? Then comes initiation and the other stages from there. Do any of you have something where you've been contemplating teapotting for a big, long chunk of your life? Let me see a show of hands. If you've been contemplating teapotting or giving up coffee earning for a big chunk of your life. Okay. Because then you couldn't say it out loud in this group without sharing personal information. That's why we're calling it teapotting. So if I'm trying to give up my bicycle seat fetish, I don't want to tell you guys very much about my bicycle seat fetish. I want to be able to answer a question and call it teapotting. Well, teapotting just turns me on. I don't know why. Well, you can share anything you want with your friends and that kind of thing. I'm not even going to prevent you from sharing something in this context. What I'm trying to do, and let me not be glib about it because you don't deserve my glibness, okay? What I'm trying to do is to find a way that people who are so inclined can share something about the process we go through when we're trying to decide about change. To be able to share something in your experience without sharing the part of that has real personal information content. Does that make sense? And I apologize for being glib when I was first responding to you. That wasn't fair of me.
No, it does make sense.
But have I answered your question about... No, I haven't. Well, watch and see, and maybe it'll come clear. It may be the best thing we can do with it. Yes?
I've been contemplating teapotting probably the past 6 months, and I haven't taken any action. Just think about it.
Who else can relate to that? Let me see some hands, huh? I've been contemplating it, but I haven't taken any action.
20 years.
That's, I think, something many of us can relate to. Remember, one of the things about change is if the prayer says, give the courage to change what I can, then maybe change is the harder way to go sometimes, right? So, any other thoughts about the length of contemplation, what's involved in that? When?
I think a lot of the beginning of the pandemic, March of last year. I think I was a change agent that just came along for a whole bunch of
Yeah.
So I was pre-contemplating since at least then. But more recently, I have others really pushing me to be teapotting. And I'm like, hold on a second. I'm not ready to go straight into the real contemplation. I'm just still pre-contemplating.
So I was going to ask you when you started contemplating your pre-contemplation. Because if I'm doing pre-contemplation without contemplating on it, that's pre-contemplation. Once I start contemplating on my I'm not even going to say it. My mouth is dry. Anyway, so that's one of those important factors. Other people, okay? Absolutely. Absolutely. A stretch goal is a phrase in our culture, or an aspirational goal. I don't know if I can get there, but I'm going to try. Oh, that could be a great thing. And it also brings out something else, that teapotting may be something that's real specific. Like, this is the specific goal. This is the bar I want to clear. But it could also be, I want to go farther in that direction. And so there may not be a limit or a definition to it, depending on what I'm reaching for. But you brought out something really, really important there in terms of where that change comes from. Have any of you ever had somebody more or less insist that you change something that you didn't want to change?
Oh, yeah.
Have any of those people ever had supervisory authority over you? Or have you ever lived in the same physical household with that person?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? One or the other of those? That doesn't always work real well, does it? Or,
If you have a personality trait,
I don't have any. I don't have any personality traits, but if I did, yeah. To change a personality trait, let me give you a quick example. Psychologists say that irritability is a function, when it's chronic and regular, of depression. And so if I find myself prone to irritability, I can ask myself, what's driving that? What is it that's under my skin that's irritated me, that's inside me, that makes me irritable towards others or inclined that way? And I can, through understanding myself and then deciding, if that's optional, I don't have to be at least as much and as often irritable as I've been. And I've done that. So that would be my example of something that seems like it's just personality, but that we have some influence over. So we've all, maybe, many of us at least, had examples of people wanting to change. Well, this is what you need to do. This is what you need to do. Let me tell you how to be a better and happier person. Well, thank you so much for telling me how to be like you. But there can also be times where someone loves you and or knows you and cares about you and knows what's good for you when you don't. When I went through one of the very worst things in my life that doesn't even have a name like teapotting or coffee earning, my mother made me, in the 10th grade, go to a youth group thing at the Methodist church that we belonged to. And that ended up changing my life. And if my mother had not made me do that, I don't know, what twists and turns my life would have gone, but I'm having a tear just trying to even imagine without that. Why? Because my mother knew that where I was really hurting. Even if I hadn't told her all about it, she knew I was hurting. She knew I needed something. And she knew that if she could connect me with some other peers in a context that she believed in deeply, that might have some healing power in it for me, and it did. So for me, that's an example of somebody else suggesting a change that worked. I think probably those are more the exception than the rule. But it can be. So as you think about teapotting, one of the ways to think about it is not just in terms of outside, inside, but we have different parts of us. This comes out all the time in learning about trauma and that sort of thing. I've even been on the receiving end of some trauma that's called internal family systems therapy, where you identify parts of yourself and get in touch with them and deal with all the roles they have. But let me ask you, do you feel like there's part of you that wants to teapot in a big way even, and part of you that just doesn't, you're not ready for that, or that isn't where you want to go? Does part of you feel like, I'm ready to give up coffee earning, and another part of you go, what? Give up coffee earning? This is your life. Who would you be if you gave up coffee earning? Become a teapotter? Are you out of your mind? One of the ways that I find very helpful to think about that is, I guess it's optics, it's physics. When we look at things, we need to take into account focus and range. And if I say I want to have complete, absolute focus, maximum possible focus. I've got to narrow the range down until it's almost nothing in order to have that degree of focus. If I say, I want to take in everything, I want to see, by the time I broaden everything, I have no focus. So imagine that there's something you're contemplating and part of you is saying, you know, I would love that range. I could really use more range in my life. And another part of you is going, whoa, do you realize you'll lose focus if you do that? So there could be legitimacy to both sides of that equation. There could be a necessary balance for you, for me, to discover in the different contrasting voices outside and inside ourselves and our lives. But for right now, think about this. Why now? Why at this point in your life, if you're contemplating teapotting, why now? Is there part of you that feels ready that didn't feel ready before? And if you're contemplating but you haven't done anything, is there a part of you that thinks it could be a mistake to teapot? Why does part of you feel ready? Is there any way to say, I'm ready to teapot? There's part of me that feels ready to teapot. Is there any way to identify, in some sense, what part of you feels ready to teapot without saying what your teapot is? Anyone? Or how about the part, no, don't do that. We don't have to have fancy names for our parts. But I will make one reference to the trauma stuff. I just recently did 5 weeks of 1-hour free webinars of world experts on trauma. One of the things I found very instructive, we're all taught in contemporary pop psychology to think in terms of our wounded child or the inner vulnerability. But relational theory, who I think Dr. Terry Real was developing and promulgating, holds that all of us as adults carry along 2 children with us. There's the vulnerable child, but there's also what he calls the adaptive child. The vulnerable child may be like a 3 or 4-year-old, but the adaptive child is like a 9 or 10-year-old. The adaptive child protects our vulnerability. But the adaptive child acts like it thinks an adult should act. It's a kid version of an adult. So it's real black and white and bossy and judgmental and no, you just need to do that. And it might say things like, no, never let them see you cry. You can never show weakness. You have to always be strong. The best way to be strong is fight back. Those kinds of things, formula, black and white judgment, get locked in. So what the session on the ways that trauma can interfere in adult relationships today, it's not the vulnerable child that messes up our relationships. It's the so-called adaptive child that still acts out a kid's version of a grown-up whenever we're feeling pressured and triggered and like we got to defend ourselves. Then that kid version of a grown-up becomes how we act. Anyway, just one example of the different parts. Does anyone have anything else you'd like to share about teapotting, the process of teapotting? To know the difference between whether you can and can't teapot?
Where that comes from, how that's not.
Part of what I think that wisdom involves is knowing yourself. And so part of the reason I'm asking these questions about the particular case of your teapotting, where does it come from? How far back does it go? Which parts of you? If there are parts of me that want to do it and parts of me that don't want to do it, the example I gave of my own life was that I reached things where I just was unable to make a change I wanted to act. I was unable to systematically act on the things I thought I was choosing. So what part of me was getting in the way of that? How was I sabotaging myself? What was it about me? Now, I've spent a lot of money on therapists over the last several years trying to figure that out, partly because my attitude toward that is like it's part of lifelong learning. It's a process of self-learning. And so what's the difference between you're fixing a problem for me? Actually, there was a great quote I saw in one of these things that said that the role of the therapist is not, that what the therapist is presented with is not a problem to fix, but life to be lived, something like that. That it's a matter of potential. And so if I feel stuck, for me, I'm not going to accept that it has to be that way. I think almost everybody in the world settles for less than they're capable of. And when I say less than they're capable of, I mean if I believe that I'm entitled to flourish in life. I was going to say this near the conclusion, but let me tell you, for me, what's really important, I would say, is that I am guided not by fear, but by a love of life. And that in that spirit of a love of life, that I cultivate and share my gifts to the best of my ability, and that I know real love in the different forms that it grows into my life. That's what I want. And so if I say, well, you know, you've done this, that's good enough. You got this fantastic stuff you could still do, but that's all right if you don't. I can't do that. I know what I got still left to give. And if somebody says, well, you know, this may not be everything you want in a love or in the love of your life or with family or whatever else, it's like, but it's more than most people have, and you really should accept. Well, if I have to accept that, I will. But is there a way to feel that love in an even greater way? If there is, let's go there. So, to me, wisdom, first of all, has to do with each of us understanding what we value in ourselves and in our lives, so that we're guided by what we value. Plato called it the good, and Plato said that wisdom is led by the good. And so the better we can understand the good, the form of the good in and of itself, the closer we'll be to wisdom. What that means for an individual is the more I can understand what the good life is for me, the more wisely I can make choices as I'm living through my life. Is that helpful in terms of the wisdom thing? And I appreciate you calling me back to my topic. I need that something. Not only do I speak Italian, I speak digression. Pardon?
Yeah, because that was good. That's
Uh-oh, I made it up. I wasn't quoting anybody. The statement about the more I know the good in my own life, that part? Okay, so if for Plato, knowing the good, the form of the good in and of itself is what constitutes wisdom, real life wisdom for me is that the better I understand what the good life is for me, the better I will be able to make choices and to orient my life in a way that promotes a good way of living and good outcomes within those values for myself. So I have to know what my values are. I have to know what I want out of life. Because if I'm lying on my deathbed and I did a great job of living your values, but they weren't mine, that's not where I want to be. So you all can tell, yeah, I'm talking Plato, but I'm an existentialist. You know, what the heck? It is all good. So in terms of that spirit of all good, I want to say that acceptance is something we can know also. I gave an example, but I want to quickly say, suppose I got married again. And suppose my husband suffered really strong anxiety unless we left at least 15 minutes early for wherever we needed to go. And suppose I'm not that way at all. We all know what grudging toleration is, right? Oh, God, there he goes again. But imagine that you could really know acceptance and understand it in a different way. Imagine I said, you know, honey, it's because of your wife. She did that to you. I know you've told me what happened in your marriage. It makes me sick, but that's why you do that. I know, Mark. But I'm not going back to relive any of that stuff in my marriage in order to get over this. It's not just how I am, but it's how I am for a while to come, because I'm not going to go back and do no kind of therapy to get through that stuff. So one thing, my way of handling that might be to try to find a place of acceptance where I can say, okay, at least for now, it's not an option to ask him to really change that. So here's my thought. I will try to be ready 15 minutes before, and we'll set that as the time we're going to leave. We'll move it up 15 minutes. I'll try to be ready every time. And what we're going to do is this. If I'm 15 minutes early, we're going to use that extra time for us. We're going to stop just before we get there, and you're going to kiss me, and you're going to tell me how much you appreciate me for 10 minutes. And if I'm late, if I don't make the 15 minutes, then as soon as we're able, I make it up to you, and the script is flipped. So what have I done? I've tried, in the spirit of love, in the spirit of acceptance, to say, okay, let's do this in a way that we're doing it intentionally instead of grudgingly, that we're lifting each other up, and that we're building our relationship instead of tearing each other down. That's how I would do it. So there are a million ways out there. There are advices and tips. Just driving here this morning, one of my favorite philosophers came on the radio with perhaps the wisest self-help advice ever written. Want to hear it? There's nothing you can do that can't be done. Really? Have you heard that before? Philosophers debate whether there's such a thing as a meaningful tautology. I think that is one. It's the same in the predicate and the subject, but it means something. There's nothing you can do that can't be done. John Lennon said that. It's the first line of All You Need Is Love. The lyrics of the verses are phenomenal. Anyway, I leave you with that thought. There's nothing you can do that can't be done. Thank you for your patience. And whatever your teapot is, may it steam a beautiful kitchen full of change in your life. Whatever your coffee earned, may it be found by someone else at the Goodwill. Thank you.